How do you see yourself? What labels do you give yourself in your mind? Because how you see yourself has a massive impact on your life. It can shape our confidence and our actions and our courage. And some of us have really positive labels that we give ourselves. We'll see ourselves as a brilliant parent, or as a shrewd project manager, or as a fun friend. But we also have other labels that we give ourselves, that we were a loser, that we're a failure, that we don't quite measure up. Well, today we're going to explore a really odd expression that we find from one of Jesus' friends, one of his followers. But it's a label that I think could have a dramatic impact on our lives if we were to take it and adopt it for ourselves. Welcome to my channel. My name's Derek, and for the last 3 decades I've been helping people explore and develop faith. And in these videos I just want to give you some tools and some insights that might help you live a deeper and a more meaningful life. So what labels we give ourselves. I came across some really interesting research recently from researchers at Stanford University, and they were testing people cheating. So they were giving this experiment where they were on their own and they had to toss a coin, and they had to predict whether it was going to be heads or tails, and then they toss it and record the answer, predict again, toss it, record the answer, and they were just on their own, and then they had to report the results back. And every time they guessed right, they were rewarded with $1. So there was a bit of incentive. And they give them some instructions. They secretly had 2 groups, and they were given some instructions before the test. And one instruction told them not to cheat, and another instruction told them not to be a cheater. You see the difference there? One labeled their behavior, one labeled their identity. Don't cheat, don't be a cheater. And guess which one had the biggest impact on them? What they found is when they told them not to be a cheater, which was a label and an identity, that had a bigger impact, and those people cheated less. And the labels that you give yourself, that even subconsciously, the things that you say about yourself, has a massive impact in terms of how you feel and your joy and your satisfaction in life. And most of our identities are like behavior based. We'll say, I'm a good runner because we run good. I'm a good lover because we're good in bed. I'm good with money because we kind of handle that. Or I'm not very good as a parent because we lose our temper all the time. I'm not very good with my health. I'm greedy because we eat too much. A lot of our labels come from our behavior or what people observe, particularly parents maybe, and those people we brought up, or teachers when we were younger. And those labels can stick and be a really heavy burden for us, particularly if they're negative, but even if they're positive. Because if you've got a label that's positive but comes from your behavior, that you perform well at work, or you run, or you're healthy, what happens when you lose your job, or you're no longer good at that thing, or you lose your temper? If your sense of self is based on your identity, is based on your behavior, and that's a really heavy weight for us. It's a real pressure and a stress. And I want to offer you something that might give you a lot of freedom in this area. And there's a really interesting fact about one of Jesus' followers. And he had really 2 closest friends. They were all kind of in circles of how close. And at the inner circle, he had these 3 guys that he walked with, and he told them and showed them more than anybody else. And there was 3 of them: Peter, James, and John. And one of them, John, he lived longer than anyone else. And there was a lot of persecution in the early church after Jesus had died and his resurrection. And most of the followers then eventually got killed. But John outlived them all. And he lived maybe to his 80s, they reckon. And so you can imagine he was the last one that people would see who actually had spent time with Jesus on earth, had seen his flesh and blood. And there's 4 biographies of Jesus that we have: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then John wrote one as well. But John wrote his at the very end of his life, in his last few years. So he wrote them a few decades after the other ones. And so it's more of a kind of, in hindsight, reflective journal of the things that had happened. And in it, he's in the story because he was hanging around with Jesus. But when it comes to writing about himself and mentioning that he was there, he never uses his name. He never says there was Peter, James, and John. He says something else. He says there was Peter, James, and the disciple that Jesus loved, the beloved disciple. He puts himself in the story and he gives himself that name. And I used to think that was a bit odd, and it's a bit like embarrassing, isn't it? If you're writing a story and you're in the story and you're saying, yeah, Jesus had all these friends and he loved them all, but I was the favourite. A bit kind of bigging himself up. But as I've got to know John and read his other letters, so he's wrote some letters that you get in the Bible as well, and you get more of a sense of who he is, and when I realised he wrote this story towards the end of his life, I started to see it a bit differently, that he didn't put his name, but he said he was the one that Jesus loved in all the stories. That actually essentially what he's saying is he's not claiming his identity as like one of the original 12 or as the great church leader or as the great teacher, the one who's writing all these things that people are learning from, the one who was in contact with him, the apostle. He's not leaning into any of those great labels, although they had right. He's kind of getting to the end of his life, and as he thinks about his life, you think actually the thing that matters, the identity that's the biggest feature of my life, is just I'm somebody that Jesus loved. I'm someone that Jesus valued. And when John was younger, it's interesting in the records, him and his brother James, they were described as sons of thunder, and they always didn't come off that well. They were quite into status and power plays. And there's one moment where they get their mum to go and speak to Jesus and says, listen, can you give my boys, they're really good, can you give them like some of the top jobs, when you come into your kingdom? So it's quite a dramatic change from someone who is then obsessed with titles and positions, that he gets to this position where he's writing himself in the story, and he just even put his name, his status, he's just one who Jesus loved. And that same invitation is available to you, that you could have that foundation, that identity of being somebody valued and loved by Jesus. You see, there's a world of difference between what explains you and what defines you. That your story explains you, but it doesn't define you. Your pain might explain you, but it doesn't define you. That your failures might explain you, but they don't define you. Your successes might explain something about you, but you don't define you. That you're only the one who made you can give you an identity and a label that's accurate. And the label that you get, you don't earn it, you don't achieve it, you just receive it. What would it mean today to start from a position and give yourself a label and to think about yourself, not about your flaws and your failures, but somebody loved by Jesus? What would it take and what impact would it have today? Not to label yourself around your successes and your roles and your identities, which put a pressure on behaving right and performing, but you were able just to relax into that identity and label of someone who is loved by Jesus. Maybe just ponder that today. Just think about that today. And maybe you want to enter into that and just receive that label and tell yourself and write yourself into your story as someone who's just loved by Jesus. Because I suspect that could change everything. That could change your confidence, and that could change your peace, and that could change your self-worth. Hope you found that useful. If you want more tips and tools, hit the subscribe and the notification button down below, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.